The nightmare always began identically. Ancient bone-colored sand stretched infinitely under a sky bleached white by merciless heat. The Humvee in front of her transformed into an orange fireball. The blast expanded in dreamlike slow motion, each metal fragment spinning through scorching air like lethal celebration. The screaming came next. Always the screaming. Captain Marcus Calloway's voice pierced the pandemonium, issuing commands no one would survive to execute. Then came the hands, rough, violent hands yanking her backward into blackness reeking of diesel, blood, and something else. Something that smelled like pure terror. The darkness spoke Russian. Staff Sergeant Rachel Thornton jolted awake in her bunk at Forward Operating Base Wolverine, her hand instinctively reaching for the absent sidearm. Her heart slammed against her ribcage as if attempting escape. The berthing compartment lay dark except for crimson emergency lighting that painted everything the shade of old wounds. 24 Marines slept restlessly around her, their unconscious minds knowing any moment could be their last. She checked her watch. 400 hours. Another nightmare, another memory refusing burial. But this morning would be different. This morning, her past was about to catch up with her in ways she never imagined. Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. Thornton swung her legs over the narrow bed's edge, sitting momentarily while steadying her breathing, allowing reality to override memory. Afghanistan, not Iraq. 2011, not 1991. She was 38, not 18. She had survived. That was supposed to matter. The silver streak cutting through her dark hair caught the red illumination as she ran fingers through it, a physical scar from the day everything changed. Stress, doctors had explained years later. Severe psychological trauma manifesting as pigmentation changes. She preferred thinking of it as just another scar among many. She dressed silently, pulling on utilities with the mechanical precision of someone who'd performed the task 10,000 times. The uniform hung loose on her small frame. She'd always been petite, exactly why Calloway had selected her for the ventilation shaft. Small enough to navigate spaces that would trap larger soldiers. Small enough to be underestimated until opponents realized their fatal mistake. What she didn't know was that someone from that Iraqi bunker had been searching for her for 20 years and had finally found her. Forward Operating Base Wolverine's corridors sat mostly empty at this hour, just occasional bleary-eyed Marines stumbling toward the head or returning from graveyard perimeter shifts. Nobody gave her a second glance. That's how she preferred it. Being noticed led to being remembered. Being remembered led to questions she refused to answer. She navigated to the small gym, a converted storage container smelling of sweat, rust, and determination. The weights were mismatched, scavenged from various sources, but they served their purpose. She worked through her routine with quiet intensity, pushing her body through exercises having nothing to do with military fitness standards, and everything to do with maintaining capabilities she prayed never to need again. But in her experience, prayers rarely got answered. By 700, showered and dressed, she sat in the cramped dining facility with coffee tasting like motor oil and regret. Around her, the fob awakened with combat zone-controlled chaos. Voices raised in greeting or complaint, distant helicopter rotor thumps, the ever-present diesel fuel and dust smell. She was reading an advanced ballistics technical manual when the PA system announcement came. All personnel assigned to Alpha Company Medical Bay, 800 hours for routine readiness physicals. That means you Marines, no exceptions. Thornton closed the manual and finished her coffee. Medical Bay. She hated medical bays, too many memories of other medical bays, other doctors probing scars and asking questions starting with concern and ending with suspicion. But orders were orders, and she'd learned long ago that avoiding attention meant following the script perfectly. At 7:55, she sat on a diagnostic bed's edge in the medical bay, back straight, hands resting calmly on her knees. The bay crowded with Marines awaiting their turn, most looking bored or annoyed at this morning interruption. A young corporal sat beside her, practically vibrating with nervous energy. "First deployment?" Thornton asked quietly. Corporal Tyler Brennan jumped slightly, then nodded. Had that fresh from the States look, uniform relatively clean, eyes still holding optimism remnants, Texas accent when he spoke. "That obvious, Staff Sergeant?" She allowed a faint smile. "You'll be fine, remember your training and listen to your team leader." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." He hesitated, then added, "I heard you transferred from embassy duty in Rome. Must be quite a change." "It is." She didn't elaborate, and something in her tone made Brennan decide not to push further. Smart kid. He'd probably survive his deployment. What neither of them knew was that in exactly 3 minutes, their world would explode. Literally. Across the bay, Major Diana Wolfe reviewed intelligence reports on a data pad, her face set in the perpetual expression of someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. Former interrogator, if rumors were true. She carried herself with careful control of someone determined never to repeat past mistakes. The medic processing Marines was efficient and professional, a Navy corpsman moving with economy of motion from handling hundreds of these physicals. Thornton watched him work, cataloging his movements, his routine, how he'd ask each Marine to remove their shirt for the bioscanner. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about, except she always worried. The pneumatic hiss of the bay doors opening cut through low conversation murmur like a knife. The atmosphere change was instantaneous and total. Back straightened. Casual conversations died mid-sentence. The tension that only comes from serious rank suddenly appearing flooded the room like ice water. Colonel Warren Pierce strode into the medical bay with the bearing of someone who'd spent 4 decades in uniform and never once questioned whether he belonged there. At 62, he looked carved from granite and disappointment. His uniform was immaculate, his posture parade ground perfect, his eyes the color of winter storms. 2 junior officers flanked him, trying and failing to match his presence. This was someone who'd led Marines through actual combat, not the sanitized drone-assisted version passing for warfare in some circles. Grenada in '83, the first Iraq War, a dozen deployments that officially didn't exist. He carried those years in his jaws set and his gazes wait. And he was about to discover something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about war, sacrifice, and the woman sitting quietly in front of him. The senior medical officer, Commander Mitchell, nearly tripped rushing to greet the colonel. "Colonel Pierce, sir, we weren't expecting an inspection this morning." "The nature of surprise inspections, Commander." Pierce's voice was gravel and authority. "Is there a reason I shouldn't be inspecting my Marines' medical readiness?" "No, sir. Of course not, sir. Everything's within operational parameters. Readiness levels are at 96%, well above. I'll be the judge of that." Pierce moved through the bay with predatory grace of someone who'd learned long ago that showing weakness equaled being weak. His eyes swept across waiting Marines, assessing, judging, finding them wanting in both specific and general ways. He picked up a data pad from a nearby console, scrolling through the roster with dismissive speed. His thumb stopped moving. His eyes narrowed fractionally. "Thornton, Rachel, Staff Sergeant." He looked up, his gaze scanning waiting Marines until it settled on her. "Transfer from embassy security in Rome." Thornton met his eyes steadily. "Yes, sir." "Stand up when I'm addressing you, Staff Sergeant." She stood, coming to attention. Even at attention, she was unremarkable, 5'6", 130 pounds, the kind of person who could disappear in a crowd of 3. The silver streak in her dark hair was the only distinguishing feature. But what Colonel Pierce was about to see would change everything. For her, for him, and for everyone in that room. Pierce walked closer, studying her with intensity of someone who'd spent his life evaluating Marines and finding most insufficient. Embassy duty. He said it like it was a disease. That's where we send Marines to stand around looking pretty and checking invitation lists. Where careers go to die slowly while pretending to be alive. Several waiting Marines shifted uncomfortably. Nobody spoke. We're fighting a war, Staff Sergeant Thornton. A real war with real enemies who want real Americans dead. And the Marine Corps sends me a security guard who spent the last 3 years making sure Italian diplomats didn't steal the canapes. Thornton said nothing. There was nothing to say. Men like Pierce had already made up their minds before opening their mouths. Contradicting them only made it worse. Standards have fallen, Commander Mitchell, Pierce continued, his voice carrying easily through the now silent bay. When I was a young lieutenant, Marines sent to combat zones had to earn it. Now we're taking anyone who can fog a mirror and spell Marine with only 2 mistakes. Staff Sergeant Thornton meets all physical requirements, sir, Mitchell offered weakly. Physical requirements are the bare minimum, Commander. The bare minimum doesn't win wars. The bare minimum gets Marines killed. He looked back at Thornton. Tell me, Staff Sergeant, what's your specialty? Checking IDs, making sure visiting senators don't trip over their own egos. Small arms maintenance, sir, advanced marksmanship, combat life-saving. Ah, a shooter. His tone made clear what he thought of that claim. Let me guess, expert qualification on the range back at Quantico where the targets don't shoot back and the biggest danger is sunburn. Yes, sir. It was easier to agree, always easier to agree. The alternative was explaining things nobody would believe and that she'd spent 20 years trying to forget. What she didn't realize was that in less than 2 minutes she wouldn't have a choice about those explanations anymore. Pierce turned to Mitchell. Continue with your physicals, Commander. Let's see if the rest of your Marines are at least up to minimum standards. He didn't leave. That was the problem. He stood there, arms crossed, a silent and intimidating presence, while the corpsman nervously gestured for Thornton to approach the bioscanner. The scanner was a large chrome and sensor arch designed to detect everything from bone microfractures to early-stage cancer. Standard medical technology, nothing invasive. Just remove your shirt, step through the arch, and let the machines catalog everything about your body you might prefer keeping private. Thornton had known this moment was coming. She'd been dreading it for 3 years, ever since requesting transfer out of Rome and back to a combat zone. Embassy duty had been safe, anonymous, a place where nobody looked too closely at anyone because everyone had secrets they preferred buried. But safety was also its own kind of death, and 3 years ago she decided she was tired of dying slowly. Staff Sergeant, the corpsman said, your tunic, please. She could feel every eye in the bay on her, could feel Pierce's judgment weight. Could feel the past pressing against the present like a fist against glass, waiting for the moment when pressure would become too much and everything would shatter. And shatter it would, in exactly the way she'd feared most. Her hands went to her uniform's high collar. The fabric rustled in the quiet room. She pulled the tunic over her head, folded it with mechanical precision, and placed it on the diagnostic bed's edge. Then she turned to face the scanner. For one suspended moment, there was only medical equipment's low hum and air conditioning's soft whisper. Then came the sharp intake of breath from the corpsman, the muttered curse from somewhere behind her, the absolute crushing silence that followed as every person in the medical bay processed what they were seeing. Thornton's back was a roadmap of violence. The scars started at her shoulders and didn't stop until reaching her waistline. These weren't clean surgical lines of medical intervention. These were survival scars. Scars of lessons learned in blood and agony and the kind of darkness most people only saw in nightmares. A starburst pattern of melted, puckered flesh bloomed over her left shoulder blade. Shrapnel burns from an IED that had detonated close enough to feel the explosion's heat on her skin, close enough to smell her own flesh cooking. 3 parallel gouges ran diagonally across her spine, each as wide as a finger, the tissue raised and discolored. They looked like claw marks, which in a way they were. The kind of marks left by a human hand holding jagged metal, dragging it slowly across skin while asking questions in a language that turned pain into vocabulary. Cigarette burns dotted her lower back in deliberate pattern, small, round, precise. The kind of burns applied methodically, one after another, while someone counted in Russian and waited for screams that never came. Rope burns circled both wrists, visible even now as pale scar tissue bands where skin had rubbed raw against restraints during days of hanging from ceiling pipes while gravity and time did their work. A long puckered scar ran along her right side ribs. A bullet grazed close enough to crack a rib, close enough to make breathing agony for weeks. Another inch to the left and it would have punctured her lung and ended everything in an Iraqi bunker 20 years ago. But it was the tattoo that made Pierce's blood run cold. Small, black, barely visible among healed wounds' chaos. On her neck's nape, just below her hairline where a uniform collar would normally hide it, the number 91. And below that, 2 letters, TS, Task Force Sandstorm. Pierce had seen that insignia exactly once in his career, 20 years ago, in a classified briefing supposed to stay classified until everyone involved was dead. A briefing about a reconnaissance team that had gone deep behind enemy lines during Desert Storm. 8 operators sent to locate mobile Scud missile launchers before they could strike coalition forces or Israeli cities. Insertion successful. Mission accomplished. Entire team lost, or so the official record stated, but there had been rumors, whispers in Pentagon halls, late-night conversations between intelligence officers who'd seen after-action reports never making it into official files. Stories about a survivor, a single operator who'd walked out of the Iraqi desert after 6 days of evasion and pursuit, carrying intelligence that had enabled the final phase of coalition airstrikes. They called her the Reaper of Baghdad, a ghost story, a legend nobody quite believed but everyone wanted to be true, and she was standing right in front of him. Pierce's voice, when he finally found it, was stripped of all earlier condescension. It was the voice of someone who'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. "Where did you get those marks, Staff Sergeant?" Thornton didn't turn around. She stood perfectly still, her scarred back a testament to a life her service record claimed she'd never lived. "Iraq, sir, long time ago." "How long ago?" "Desert Storm, 1991. The math was immediate and damning. If she'd been in Desert Storm, she would have been, 18 at the oldest, a teenager. But Task Force Sandstorm had been special operations, Tier 1 assets, the kind of operators with a decade of experience minimum, the kind of people who didn't officially exist. Pierce pulled out his data pad with hands that weren't quite steady. His fingers moved across the screen, accessing classified personnel files requiring authorization he technically didn't have but had stopped caring about 30 seconds ago. He found her file, found the dates. Found the service record that was simultaneously too detailed and not detailed enough. And then he found the flag. Thornton, Rachel M. SSGT, status, KIA, date of death, 26 February 1991. Operation, redacted, remains not recovered, killed in action, 20 years ago. This woman standing in front of him had been legally dead longer than some Marines in this room had been alive. "You're listed as killed in action, Staff Sergeant." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent medical bay like a gunshot. "You've been dead for 20 years. "Yes, sir. Those markings, that tattoo, those are Task Force Sandstorm identifiers." "Yes, sir. Forgery of classified unit insignia is a court-martial offense. Impersonating deceased personnel is a federal crime. Do you understand the situation you're in right now?" Finally, Thornton turned. Her eyes met his, and Pierce saw something in them that made him take an involuntary step backward. Not defiance, not fear, something colder, something older. The eyes of someone who'd walked through fire and discovered that fire was just another kind of weather. "I understand perfectly, Colonel, do you?" Before Pierce could formulate a response, before he could decide whether to have this woman arrested or debriefed or both, the universe made the decision for him. It started with a sound. Not an explosion, not yet. Just a deep, resonant vibration coming up through the deck plates, the kind of subsonic rumble that made teeth ache and triggered every combat veteran's instant recognition of incoming ordnance. Then the warning sirens. The bone-chilling wail of the attack alarm that meant incoming, find cover now, this is not a drill. Then the impact. The RPG hit the medical bay's southern wall with a freight train carrying nothing but violence. The warhead, designed to penetrate light armor, turned reinforced concrete into shrapnel and reinforced shrapnel into shrapnel. The explosion was everything at once: light, sound, pressure, heat. The fundamental forces of physics compressed into a single moment of kinetic fury that rewrote the basic rules of what walls were supposed to do. The blast wave hit Thornton like a physical fist. Training and instinct took over before conscious thought registered. She was already moving, already twisting her body mid-air, already calculating angles and impact points and how to absorb maximum energy without breaking anything vital. She hit the deck in a controlled roll, came up on one knee, her hands already reaching for weapons that weren't there because this was a medical bay. This was supposed to be safe. Nothing was safe. Around her, chaos painted itself in screams and smoke and the terrible silence of Marines who'd been shouting orders 1 second and wouldn't be shouting anything ever again the next. The bioscanner collapsed with a shriek of tortured metal, its chrome arch twisting as it fell, missing Corporal Brennan's head by inches as he was thrown against a supply cabinet. His head connected with the edge with a sound that made Thornton's stomach clench. Unconscious, bleeding from a scalp wound. Alive but fragile. Assess and triage. Major Wolf had been thrown across the room, her data pad shattering against a wall, her body slamming into a diagnostic cart that immediately collapsed beneath her. She didn't move. Blood ran from her nose. Possible concussion. Colonel Pierce had been closest to the impact point. The blast had picked him up like a child's toy and slammed him into the far wall. He hit hard, his shoulder taking the brunt, his head snapping forward then back. The unmistakable whiplash motion of someone whose brain just bounced off the inside of their skull. He slid down the wall, leaving a blood smear, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. Dislocated shoulder, possible concussion. Stunned but conscious, still in the fight. The other Marines in the bay were down, some screaming, some silent. Too clearly dead, their bodies positioned in the exact wrong places at the exact wrong time. The corpsman was trying to stand, his hands covered in blood that might have been his own or might have been someone else's. His eyes wide with shock that hadn't quite processed into action yet. And outside, in the corridors beyond the shattered wall, Thornton could hear sounds that made every hair on her body stand up. Bootsteps, multiple contacts, moving with tactical precision, not running, not panicking, advancing with the controlled aggression of people who knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't a random Taliban attack. This was a raid, professional, coordinated. The RPG had been surgical, placed specifically to breach the medical bay, to create chaos, to set conditions for what came next. Thornton was on her feet, her mind shifting gears from whoever she'd been pretending to be for the last 3 years to something much older and infinitely more dangerous. The mask was off. The careful anonymity was gone. What was left was the thing that had walked out of the Iraqi desert 20 years ago. And that thing had very specific ideas about survival. Triage first. Save who you can save, accept who you can't. She lunged toward Brennan, her fingers immediately going to his neck, finding the pulse point. Strong, rapid but strong. The head wound looked worse than it was, scalp wounds always did, but he was out cold and would be useless for at least several minutes. She grabbed a clean bandage from a scattered medical kit, wrapped his head with brutal efficiency, applied direct pressure to slow bleeding. Not gentle, functional. He was an asset now, nothing more, a medic who might be needed. Major Wolf next. Thornton checked her pupils, her breathing, the way her body was positioned. Concussion confirmed. Possible internal injuries, but conscious now, her eyes tracking movement, her hands trying to push herself up. "Stay down," Thornton ordered, her voice carrying command tone that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with absolute certainty. "Don't move until I clear you." Wolf's eyes focused on her. Confusion and training warred in her expression. Training one. She stayed down. Pierce was trying to stand, his working hand pressed against the wall, his face gray with pain and shock. His left arm hung uselessly, the shoulder clearly dislocated, the joint separated and screaming. He was trying to speak, trying to issue orders, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. Thornton crossed to him in 3 strides. No warning, no preparation. She grabbed his dislocated arm and opposite shoulder, set her stance, and yanked with precisely measured force. The shoulder popped back into its socket with a sound like a pistol shot. Pierce's scream was involuntary, bitten off almost immediately, his teeth clenching against white-hot agony of nerve endings just introduced to the concept of relocated anatomy. His eyes went wide, then focused, the pain's shock actually clearing some concussion fog from his brain. "Functional," Thornton said flatly. "You'll be useless for fine motor skills, but you can shoot. Can you shoot, Colonel?" Pierce stared at her like seeing her for the first time, which in a way he was. The woman who'd stood quietly taking his abuse 20 minutes ago was gone. What stood in front of him now was someone who just field triaged 4 casualties, relocated a shoulder without anesthetic, and done it all with calm efficiency of someone who'd done it before, many times before. "I can shoot," he managed. "Good, because they're coming through that wall in about 30 seconds. The bootsteps were closer now. Thornton could hear voices, low, proficient, Russian, speaking Russian. Her blood turned to ice water. She moved to the shattered wall, staying low, staying in shadows and smoke. Through the gap, she could see figures moving in quarters beyond, not Afghan insurgents. These men wore body armor, carried modern weapons, moved with tactical discipline of professional soldiers. Black fatigues, no insignia, no identifying marks. Contractors, mercenaries, the kind of people who fought for money and asked no questions about who was paying or why. But the weapons they carried were Russian, AK-104s, VSS Ventores, and the way they moved, the way they cleared corners and covered each other's advances, that was Spetsnaz doctrine, Soviet special operations, the kind of training that only came from one place. Thornton felt something cold and sharp settle into her chest, a feeling she thought she'd buried 20 years ago in an Iraqi bunker. They weren't here for the fob. They were here for her. She grabbed an M4 rifle from a dead Marine. Checked the magazine, charged the weapon, muscle memory from another life. She moved to where Pierce was trying to stand, pressed the rifle into his working hand. "Can you use this?" "I'm a Marine, of course I can." "Then use it. They're breaching in 10 seconds. When they come through that wall, you fire on anything that isn't us. Don't aim for headshots. Aim center mass. Keep firing until they stop moving." "Who the hell are?" "Later. Right now we survive. Questions come after." She scanned the ruined medical bay, her eyes cataloging resources with pure desperation's speed. Overturned medical carts, scattered supplies, oxygen tanks, exposed wiring from severed power conduits, a ruptured coolant line hissing faintly in the corner. An idea formed, terrible, desperate, likely to kill them all if she miscalculated by even a fraction. Perfect. She grabbed an armful of supplies, moving with purpose, ignoring Pierce's questions, ignoring the screaming alarms and smoke and approaching sound of men who carried the same weapons that had killed her team 20 years ago. IV bags full of flammable anesthetic. Oxygen tank, the small portable kind. Medical tape. Exposed electrical wiring. A length of surgical tubing. She worked fast, her hands moving with precision that came from having done something similar before, in different circumstances, with different materials, but always with the same goal. Make the enemy die faster than they can make you die. The device she constructed would have made any explosives expert either proud or horrified. Possibly both. It was crude, unstable, the kind of improvised explosive that had no business working and every chance of killing the person who built it. But Thornton had learned long ago that desperation was the mother of very specific kinds of innovation. She positioned the device near the breached wall, used dead Marines' bodies to obscure it, armed it with a simple electrical trigger wired to exposed conduit. Not complex. Complexity was the enemy of reliability, and she needed this to be very, very reliable. "What are you doing?" Pierce demanded, "building a very warm welcome." She turned to face him, and he saw her eyes again. Those cold, ancient eyes belonging to someone who'd made peace with death a long time ago. When they breach, you fire 3 rounds at the ceiling, aim at the lights, make them think you're panicking, make them think you're a target. "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand, you need to trust me. 2 kinds of people in a crisis, Colonel, those who make plans and those who get in the way of plans. Decide which one you are right now." Pierce looked at her, really looked at her, saw the scars, saw the tattoo. Saw the absolute certainty in her eyes, made his decision. "I'm with you, Staff Sergeant." "Good, then get behind that overturned bed and don't move until I tell you to move." The sound of the breaching charge was unmistakable. A flat, hard crack that punched through what remained of the wall like a fist through wet paper. The explosion cleared the opening, widening the breach, turning it from a crack into a doorway. The first contractor through was professional, weapon up, eyes scanning, looking for targets. He found Pierce instead. The colonel fired 3 rounds just like Thornton had told him, all of them going wild, hitting ceiling, walls, anywhere but the enemy. Making noise, drawing attention. Perfect. 2 more contractors poured through the breach, their weapons tracking toward Pierce's position, their training telling them to suppress the threat, to overwhelm with firepower, to end this quickly. They moved past the pile of bodies, past the improvised device hidden in shadows and smoke. Exactly where Thornton had known they would go, because she understood how men like this thought. She understood it because she had been taught by men just like them. She waited. Patience learned in a sniper's nest, in a desert hide, in an Iraqi bunker where patience was the difference between living and dying. Waited until all 3 were in the kill zone. Waited until they were committed. Waited until there was no retreat. Then she pressed the trigger. The oxygen tank ruptured first, releasing its contents in violent, instantaneous expansion. Pure oxygen flooding into a space filled with aerosolized anesthetic from the IV bags, mixing with the ruptured coolant that had been leaking for the last 60 seconds. The electrical spark from exposed wiring ignited it all at once. What happened next wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. It was a fuel-air detonation. The air itself caught fire. A wave of white-hot pressure erupted from the room's center, expanding in a sphere of pure kinetic fury that turned atmosphere into weapon. For a split second, the medical bay was illuminated with light brighter than the sun. Then the pressure wave hit. The 3 contractors never knew what killed them. One moment they were advancing on a target. The next moment they ceased to exist as anything recognizable. The heat was so intense their body armor melted before their bodies did. The pressure so extreme their internal organs ruptured before flames could reach them. The wave slammed into Thornton and Pierce even behind cover. It felt like being hit by a truck made of solid air. Thornton's lungs compressed, breath driven from her body. Her ears popped. Her vision went white. Heat-seared, exposed skin, the temperature spiking to levels that would have been fatal if sustained for more than a fraction of a second. Then it was over. The vacuum came next, air rushing back in to fill space that had been temporarily emptied. The detonation's roar was replaced by high-pitched ringing that told Thornton her eardrums had been damaged but not destroyed. She pushed herself up, her body screaming protests she ignored. Pierce was doing the same, his face a mask of shock and pain and something that might have been respect or might have been terror. The breach in the wall was now a smoking crater. What remained of the three contractors was scattered across walls in patterns that would give forensic analysts nightmares for weeks. The fire had consumed most available oxygen and was now dying, leaving behind only thick black smoke and the smell of things that should never be burned. Thornton grabbed her rifle, moved to the crater, scanned quarters beyond. More voices, more movement. The first breach had failed, but there would be others. Men like this didn't stop because of one setback. They adapted. They learned, they came back harder. She could hear them regrouping, calling out in Russian, changing tactics. And then she heard a voice that made 20 years of carefully constructed distance collapse into nothing. A voice she remembered from a bunker in Iraq. A voice that had asked her questions while applying lit cigarettes to her skin. A voice that had promised her she would die slowly, painfully, alone in a place where no one would ever find her body. Colonel Viktor Volkov. And he was calling her name, not her real name, her old name, the name that had died in that bunker. Reaper, the voice called out in heavily accented but clear English. I know you are there, I know you are alive. 20 years I have waited for this moment. Thornton's hands tightened on her rifle until her knuckles went white. Pierce was staring at her. Who is Reaper? She turned to face him, and the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. That was my call sign, she said quietly. 20 years ago, Task Force Sandstorm, Desert Storm, 8 operators sent to locate Scud launchers. We found them, we called in the strikes, then we got caught. She paused. The official record says we all died. 7 of us did. I didn't, but the man out there in that corridor, Colonel Viktor Volkov, he's the reason the other 7 are dead. He ran the interrogation. He killed my team. She moved toward the breach, toward the smoke and voices and the past that had finally caught up with her. And I've been waiting 20 years to return the favor. Pierce grabbed her arm with his good hand. Wait, we need a plan. We need support. We need to survive the next 5 minutes, Colonel. Everything else is academic. She pulled free, her eyes never leaving quarters. You want to know who I am? You want to know if I'm really the Reaper of Baghdad? You're about to find out. Stay behind me. Do what I tell you. And if you have any prayers, now would be a good time. She stepped through the breach and into the smoke. And Colonel Warren Pierce, who had spent 40 years thinking he understood Marines and warfare and courage, followed her into the darkness and realized he had never understood any of it at all. The hunt was on. The smoke hung in the corridor like a living thing, thick and black and tasting of chemicals never meant to burn together. Thornton moved through it like she'd been born in darkness, rifle up, breathing controlled, every sense extended beyond her body to map space around her through sound and air pressure, and subtle temperature shifts that told her where walls ended and enemies began. Behind her, Pierce followed with awkward caution of someone who'd spent the last 15 years commanding from behind desks and tactical displays rather than moving through kill zones. He was good, his training still solid despite the years, but he moved like someone relearning a language they'd once spoken fluently. Thornton moved like someone who had never stopped speaking it. The corridor opened into what had been a supply room before the attack. Now it was a maze of overturned shelving units and scattered equipment, creating natural choke points and blind corners that would be suicide to rush through. Perfect ambush terrain. Which meant the enemy would either avoid it entirely or use it themselves. Thornton held up a closed fist. Stop. Pierce froze instantly, his good hand tight on his rifle, his injured shoulder held carefully against his body. She pointed 2 fingers at her eyes, then at a gap between 2 fallen shelves. Movement. She had seen movement. She signaled for Pierce to cover left, then dropped to a crouch and flowed right, using shadows and debris as concealment. Her rifle tracked smoothly across potential firing positions, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard, ready but not committed. Shooting was loud. Loud drew attention. Attention brought numbers, and numbers were the one resource the enemy had in abundance. The contractor was good. He had positioned himself behind an overturned desk, his weapon covering the main approach, his body armor making him a hard target from the front. But he had made one critical mistake. He was focused on where he expected the threat to come from, not where it actually was. Thornton came at him from the side, moving with silence that came from having learned stealth from people who would kill you if you failed to learn it properly. She was within arm's reach before he realized she was there. His head started to turn, his weapon beginning to swing toward her. But momentum and physics were already committed to his original position. Her rifle butt slammed into the gap between his helmet and body armor, that vulnerable point at the skull's base where spine met brain stem. The impact was precisely measured, hard enough to shut down his central nervous system, not hard enough to shatter vertebrae. He dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering to the floor, his body going limp like someone had cut his strings. Not dead, unconscious. The distinction mattered to Thornton in ways she could never quite explain to people who had never made similar choices. She grabbed his weapon, an AK-104 with suppressor attachment and full magazine. Better than the M4 she was carrying. She passed the M4 back to Pierce and kept the AK for herself, checking the action with familiarity of someone who'd spent hundreds of hours training on Soviet weapons. The irony was not lost on her. They continued forward, moving deeper into the compound, and with every step, Thornton felt the years falling away. 3 years of embassy duty. 5 years before that in training billets. 7 years before that in logistics assignments, keeping her far from anything resembling actual combat. All of it just camouflage, protective coloration. The thing she had been in the Iraqi desert, the thing that had killed 6 guards with improvised weapons and walked 80 miles through enemy territory, that thing had never really gone away. It had just been waiting. The voices were clearer now. Russian mixed with English, commands being given, positions being established. She counted at least 8 distinct voices, possibly more. They were setting up a perimeter, creating overlapping fields of fire, turning the damaged FOB section into a fortress that would be held to assault directly, which was why she had no intention of assaulting it directly. Thornton dropped to one knee beside a damaged wall panel and gestured for Pierce to come close. When he was near enough, she spoke directly into his ear, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're establishing a strongpoint, probably holding hostages there. Standard doctrine would be to call reinforcements and pin them down, but we don't have time and we don't have numbers." "Then what do we do?" Pierce's whisper carried frustration's edge. This was his base, his Marines, his responsibility, and he was reduced to following the lead of a staff sergeant who'd been dead for 20 years. "We go around." She pointed upward toward the ceiling. "These buildings have crawl spaces between floors, ventilation, power conduits, structural supports. Taliban used to hide weapons and equipment up there. We go up, move above them, come down where they're not expecting." "That's insane. That's why it'll work." She was already moving, heading toward a damaged wall section where the explosion had torn open access to the infrastructure above. Pierce followed because at this point he had committed to the madness and there was nothing to do but see it through. The crawl space was exactly as miserable as Thornton remembered from dozens of other buildings in dozens of other countries. Hot, cramped, filled with dust that made breathing a deliberate act of will. The gaps between support beams were barely wide enough for a human body, and in some places they had to squeeze through openings that made Pierce's shoulders scrape both sides simultaneously. But it worked. They were above the enemy now, moving parallel to voices below. And nobody was looking up because nobody ever looked up until it was too late. Thornton navigated by sound and by subtle airflow changes that told her where rooms were, where the enemy was concentrated, where spaces were large enough to matter. She had done this before, in a different building, in a different war, when she'd been 18 years old and escaping from a Soviet interrogation facility with nothing but rage and determination keeping her moving. The memory hit her without warning. Sudden. Visceral, not the comfortable distance of recollection, but the immediate sensory overload of being there. Then, in that moment, the bunker in Iraq had smelled different, oil and sweat, and something metallic she later realized was blood. Her team's blood. The air had been thick with it, coating the back of her throat, making every breath taste like copper and death. She could see Captain Calloway's face, 36 years old. Grizzled and professional and completely unafraid, even when Volkov had put the pistol to his head. His last words had been to her, "Complete the mission, Reaper, that's an order." Then the gunshot. Then James Riley's muffled sob before he mastered himself, before his own death came 20 minutes later. Daniel Cross had lasted longest. The demolitions expert who had taught her how to make bombs from nothing, how to turn everyday materials into weapons, how to think 3 steps ahead of the enemy because that was the only way to survive when they outnumbered you. He had created the distraction that let her escape, charging the guards with his broken hands, buying her seconds that turned into minutes that turned into life. The flashback released her as suddenly as it had taken her, leaving her crouched in the crawl space with tears on her face that she wiped away with angry efficiency. Not now. Not here. Grief was a luxury for people who had time to indulge it, and she had never had that time. Pierce touched her shoulder gently, a question in the gesture. She shook her head once. Keep moving. They kept moving. The crawl space opened into a larger maintenance shaft running vertically through the building. Service ladder built into the wall, emergency lighting providing dim illumination. Thornton paused at the opening, listening. Below, maybe 2 floors down, she could hear the enemy. Above, silence. They needed to get lower. Needed to find where hostages were being held. Needed to do it before Volkov lost patience and started executing Marines to prove he was serious. She started down the ladder, moving with careful silence, testing each rung before committing her weight. Pierce followed, his injured shoulder making him clumsy, his breath coming in sharp hisses when he moved wrong and sent pain shooting through the joint. They were 1 floor down when Thornton heard it. A voice. Young, scared, speaking English with a Texas accent. Corporal Brennan. She held up a fist, stopping Pierce, and pressed her ear against the wall. The voices were clearer here, coming from what sounded like a large, open space. Multiple speakers, some Russian, some English, some mixing both languages with the casual fluency of people who'd worked together long enough to develop their own dialect. And then Volkov's voice, clear and commanding. Bring the medic forward. I want him to see what happens to those who resist. Thornton's blood turned to ice. She moved faster now, descending the ladder with reckless speed, no longer caring about noise because time had just become the enemy. At the bottom, she found another access panel, this one looking down into what had been the motor pool before the attack. Large open space, high ceiling, perfect for vehicle maintenance, also perfect for hostage situations. She signaled for Pierce to look through the grating beside her. Below them, the situation was exactly as bad as she had feared. 14 Marines. Hands zip-tied behind their backs, kneeling in a line. Most looked roughed up but functional. A few showing signs of serious injury. Surrounding them were 12 contractors in black tactical gear, weapons trained on prisoners, professional and calm, and completely ready to execute every single Marine if the order came. And at the room's front, standing beside a makeshift command post of laptops and radio equipment, was a man Thornton would have recognized even if 20 years had turned him into dust. Colonel Viktor Volkov. He was 55 now, his hair gone gray, his face lined with years of living in places that aged men faster than time alone could manage. But his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating. The eyes of someone who had learned that human beings were just another kind of resource to be exploited or eliminated depending on their utility. He was holding Corporal Brennan by the collar, the young medic's head still bandaged from the injury in the medical bay, his face showing the kind of terror that came from understanding exactly how bad things had gotten. Volkov had a pistol in his other hand, a Makarov. The same kind of pistol he had used to execute Captain Calloway 20 years ago. Thornton felt her hands tighten on her rifle, felt her breathing shallow, felt something cold and dark rise up from the place where she had buried it and spent 2 decades pretending it didn't exist. Volkov was speaking to the hostages, his accent thick but his English clear. "I want you all to understand something very important. Your lives mean nothing to me. You are not my mission. You are simply leverage. When your commanders realize what I have taken, they will give me what I want. And then perhaps I will let you live, perhaps." He pressed the Makarov against Brennan's temple. The young Marine closed his eyes, trembling but not begging. Good Marine, would die well if it came to that. "But first," Volkov continued, "I need to send a message. I need them to know I am serious, so one of you will die now." "Eeny, meeny, miny." Thornton was moving before conscious thought could catch up to instinct. She grabbed the access panel, wrenched it open with strength born of pure fury, and dropped through the opening. 15 feet to the floor below. She landed in a crouch, the impact jarring but manageable, her rifle already coming up, already tracking toward the first target. The contractors reacted instantly, their weapons swinging toward this new threat that had literally materialized from the ceiling. But Thornton was already firing, suppressed shots barely louder than harsh coughs. Each one placed with precision that came from 10,000 hours on rifle ranges and in kill houses. First contractor took a round through the throat, the gap between helmet and body armor. He went down gurgling. Second contractor took 2 rounds center mass, his body armor absorbing the first, his luck running out on the second as a bullet found the gap at his armpit. Third contractor was turning, was bringing his weapon to bear, was fast and well-trained and completely unprepared for someone who moved like Thornton moved. She closed the distance in 3 running steps, slammed her rifle barrel into his weapon, redirecting his fire into the ceiling, then drove her knee into his groin with enough force to lift him off his feet. As he folded forward, she brought her rifle stock down on the back of his neck. He collapsed. 4 seconds. 3 enemies down. 9 remaining, plus Volkov. Pierce dropped through the access panel behind her, landing heavily, his injured shoulder making him clumsy but his rifle steady. He fired 3 round bursts, suppressing contractors on the room's left side, forcing them into cover, buying seconds that Thornton turned into advantages. She moved like liquid violence, flowing between cover points, her rifle speaking in short, controlled bursts. A contractor leaned out to fire and took a round through his eye socket. Another tried to flank and discovered that Thornton had already anticipated the move, had already positioned herself to turn his flanking maneuver into a fatal mistake. He took 3 rounds to the chest and dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The Marines on the ground were trained well enough to recognize an opportunity when they saw one. The ones who could move through themselves flat, getting out of the line of fire. One of them, a sergeant with 3 Afghanistan tour, somehow got his zip-tied hands in front of him and grabbed a fallen contractor's weapon, bringing it to bear one-handed on the enemy. The momentum had shifted. The contractors were reacting instead of acting, defending instead of attacking, dying instead of winning. Volkov saw it happening, saw his carefully planned operation disintegrating into chaos, saw this woman who should have been dead 20 years ago tearing through his men like they were nothing. He made a decision that Thornton saw coming the moment before he made it. He grabbed Brennan, hauled the young Marine up as a human shield, and put the Makarov to his head. "Reaper," he shouted. "Enough, or the boy dies." Thornton froze. Her rifle was still trained on targets, still ready, but Volkov was behind Brennan now, using the Marine's body as cover, and any shot that went through Brennan to reach Volkov was a shot she couldn't take. The remaining contractors used the pause to regroup, to find better cover, to create overlapping fields of fire that would turn the motor pool into a killing ground if the shooting started again. Stalemate. Volkov smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just remembered that he still held cards. 20 years, he said, his voice carrying across the room. 20 years I have wondered if the stories were true, if the little girl who walked out of my bunker was real or just propaganda. And here you are, alive, still fighting, still too stubborn to die properly. Thornton said nothing. Her rifle tracked minute adjustments, looking for an angle, looking for any gap in Volkov's cover that would let her take the shot without killing Brennan. There was nothing. He knew how to use a hostage. He had done this before. "You cost me everything," Volkov continued. "My career, my reputation, my standing in the Soviet military. The intelligence you brought back, the locations you gave to your commanders. It allowed your Air Force to destroy targets we had spent months protecting. And when my superiors discovered I had let you escape, that I had failed to break one teenager, they made an example of what happens to officers who fail." He pressed the pistol harder against Brennan's temple. The young Marine's eyes were wide, his breath coming in short gasps, but he was holding it together, barely. "So I rebuilt. I started over. I found new employers, new wars, new opportunities, and I have waited for the day when I could find you and finish what I started in that bunker." He paused. "Do you remember the bunker, little girl? Do you remember the questions I asked?" Thornton's voice, when she finally spoke, was ice over iron. "I remember Captain Calloway. I remember Sergeant Riley. I remember Staff Sergeant Cross. I remember all 7 of them. I remember their names and their faces and the way they died because you murdered them. So yes, Victor, I remember the bunker. Then you remember you are only alive because you ran away like a frightened child. I'm alive because my captain gave me an order and I followed it. Mission first. Always mission first. That's what Marines do. We complete the mission." She took a slow breath. "Your move, Victor. You've got 1 hostage and 9 men. I've got unlimited patience and nothing to lose. How do you think this ends?" Volkov's smile widened, and Thornton felt her stomach drop because she recognized that smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting to reveal their real plan. "It ends," he said, "with you understanding that I am not here for hostages. I am not here for your base. I am here for you, and I am here for something your government has been hiding in this facility. Something very valuable, something worth dying for, worth killing for." He gestured to one of his contractors, who moved to a laptop and turned the screen so Thornton could see it. Security camera footage, multiple angles, all showing the same location. Lab Section 7, 3 levels down, the classified research facility that officially didn't exist and that absolutely nobody was supposed to know about. On the screen, Thornton could see more contractors moving through the lab, could see scientists held at gunpoint, could see sealed containment units being loaded onto anti-gravity sleds for transport. Volkov's voice was triumphant. "Biological samples from the scourge organisms your government encountered during the war. Tissue samples, genetic material, all carefully preserved and studied. Worth billions on the black market, worth more than billions to governments who want to develop their own bioweapons. And now, thanks to your cooperation, worth everything to me." The pieces fell into place in Thornton's mind with sickening clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was business. Volkov had used his knowledge of her, had used the fact that she would be here to plan an operation that achieved multiple objectives. Get revenge on the woman who'd ruined his career. Steal classified biological materials worth a fortune, and if Marines died in the process, that was just acceptable collateral damage. "You see," Volkov continued. I knew you would come here eventually. I have people inside your military, people who watch transfer orders, who track personnel, who told me when Rachel Thornton requested combat deployment. I have been planning this for 3 years, waiting for you to come to me, and you did, you always do, because you are a Marine and Marines are predictable in their need to be where the fighting is worst. He gestured toward the screen again. The contractors in Lab Section 7 were finishing their loading procedures. Thornton could see the time stamp. The operation was almost complete. My extraction team will be here in 8 minutes. They will take the samples and leave, and I will leave with them after I kill you the way I should have killed you in 1991. Slowly, painfully, while your friends watch. Thornton's mind was racing, calculating probabilities, assessing options, looking for the angle that would turn this impossible situation into something survivable. The problem was that Volkov was right. He had planned this carefully. He had the hostages, he had the samples, he had extraction arranged. In 8 minutes he would be gone and she would be dead, and everything she had survived, everything her team had died for would mean nothing. Unless she looked at the ceiling, at the access panel she had dropped through, at the infrastructure above that connected every part of this base to every other part, at the possibilities that existed if you were willing to sacrifice safety for speed. Colonel Pierce, she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Volkov. How much demo do you have on you? 2 flashbangs and 1 breaching charge. Why? Because I need you to do something that's going to seem insane. I'm starting to get used to that. Good, in about 30 seconds I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you're going to use that breaching charge on the eastern wall, not to go through it, to drop it. Bring down the ceiling supports, seal this room. Pierce's voice was tight with confusion and stress. That'll trap us in here with them. Exactly, and it'll also trap them in here with us, which means their extraction team can't get to them, which means Volkov has to negotiate, which means we get leverage. She paused. Trust me. You're asking me to blow up my own base. I'm asking you to save your Marines. There's a difference. Pierce was silent for 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then, make your distraction count. Thornton shifted her weight imperceptibly, testing angles, measuring distances, calculating trajectories with the part of her brain that had been trained by people who turned mathematics into murder. She had 1 chance, 1 shot. If she missed, Brennan died and the plan died with him. She centered herself, breathed. Let the room's chaos fade away until there was only the target and the distance between her and the target and the absolutely minimal movement required to close that distance. Hey, Victor, she said conversationally, you remember the bunker? What? The bunker in Iraq. You remember what I did before I left? You ran away like. I killed 6 of your guards with a sharpened spoon in my bare hands, and you know what the funny thing is? I was 18 then, I'm 38 now, which means I've had 20 years to get better at it. She moved, not toward Volkov. Toward the nearest contractor, the one who had been watching her but had let his attention slip for just a fraction of a second. She closed the gap in 2 running steps, her rifle coming up not to fire, but to block as he tried to bring his own weapon to bear. She redirected his barrel downward, stepped inside his guard, and drove her forehead into his nose with enough force to shatter cartilage and send blood spraying. As he staggered back, she grabbed the flashbang grenade from his tactical vest, pulled the pin and threw it, not at Volkov, but at the cluster of contractors on the room's far side. The grenade detonated with a flat crack of sound and a flash of light that turned the dim motor pool into instant daylight. The contractors on that side went blind and deaf, their weapons firing wildly, discipline breaking down into chaos. Volkov's head turned toward the explosion, his attention divided for exactly 2 seconds. Thornton shot Brennan in the leg. The bullet was precise, measured, deliberate. It punched through the meaty part of his thigh, missing bone and major arteries, and exited clean. The young Marine screamed and his legs gave out and he dropped straight down, his body weight pulling him out of Volkov's grip. Volkov's eyes went wide with shock as his human shield disappeared. He tried to adjust, tried to bring the Makarov to bear on Thornton, but she was already moving, already crossing the distance between them. She hit him like a freight train. Her shoulder slammed into his chest, driving him backward into the command post. Laptops and equipment scattered. His pistol went flying. They hit the ground together, Thornton on top, her hands going for his throat. And across the room, Colonel Pierce placed the breaching charge against the eastern wall's primary support column, armed it, and ran. The explosion was nothing like the fuel-air detonation in the medical bay. This was pure concussive force, precisely shaped to channel energy into structural failure. The support column shattered. The ceiling above it groaned, shifted, and began to collapse in a cascade of concrete and rebar and 2 decades of accumulated Afghan dust. The contractors on that side of the room had maybe 2 seconds to realize what was happening before several tons of building fell on top of them. The ones who survived the initial collapse were buried, trapped, screaming beneath rubble that would take hours to clear. The rest of the ceiling held, but the eastern wall was now a pile of debris that sealed the motor pool off from the rest of the base. No one was getting in. No one was getting out. The extraction team that Volkov had promised would arrive in 8 minutes might as well have been on another planet. Thornton didn't see any of it. She was too busy trying to kill a man who had been trying to kill her for 20 years. Volkov was 55, but he was Spetsnaz. And Spetsnaz officers didn't get old by being easy to kill. He bucked beneath her, throwing her weight sideways and rolled with the momentum to reverse their positions. His hands closed around her throat, squeezing, cutting off air and blood flow. Thornton's vision started to narrow, gray creeping in at the edges. She brought her hands up between his arms and struck outward, breaking his grip, using leverage rather than strength. As his hands came away, she twisted, got a leg between them, and kicked him in the solar plexus hard enough to send him flying backward. They both scrambled to their feet, circling now 2 predators who had been waiting 20 years for this moment. Volkov smiled through split lips, blood on his teeth. "You have not changed, still the stubborn child who would not break." "I broke," Thornton said quietly. "I just didn't let you see it." They crashed together again, fists and elbows and knees, no technique now, just raw violence between 2 people who wanted the other dead more than they wanted their next breath. Thornton took a punch to the ribs that cracked something. Volkov took an elbow to the temple that made him stumble. She grabbed his arm, tried for a joint lock. He powered through it, slammed her against a concrete pillar hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. They fought like people who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Fought until they were both bleeding, both exhausted, both running on nothing but willpower and hatred. And then Thornton saw her opening. Volkov threw a wide hook, too wide, his fatigue making him sloppy. She ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and drove her knee into his inner thigh, hitting the nerve cluster there. His leg gave out. As he dropped, she grabbed his head and brought it down to meet her rising knee. The impact was sickening. He collapsed. She was on him immediately, her hands finding his throat again, squeezing, watching his eyes bulge, watching his face turn purple, watching the life start to leave him. "Thornton." Pierce's voice cut through the red haze. "Thornton, stop!" She didn't stop. 20 years of waiting, 20 years of carrying her dead team, 20 years of this moment. "Staff Sergeant, that is an order." Something in the tone cut through the Marine in her, the part that had survived by following orders even when those orders meant living when she wanted to die. That part made her hands loosen. Volkov gasped, sucking in air, his eyes focusing on her with pure hatred. "Kill me," he rasped. "Do it. Finish it." "No," Thornton said, her voice shaking but her hands steady. "You don't get the easy way out. You get to stand trial. You get to face justice. You get to let the world know what you are, and you get to let the world know what my team was." She pulled plastic zip ties from her pocket and secured his hands behind his back with vicious efficiency. Then she stood, swaying slightly, her body finally registering all the damage it had taken. Around them, the motor pool had gone quiet. The remaining contractors had surrendered or were too injured to fight. The Marines were helping each other, treating wounds, checking on the injured. Brennan was already being treated by another medic, his leg wound serious but survivable. Pierce approached slowly, his rifle lowered, his face showing something between awe and horror. "You shot him! You shot your own Marine!" "I shot him in a place that wouldn't kill him. Better than letting Volkov shoot him in the head." She looked at the colonel. "Sometimes you have to hurt people to save them. Sometimes there are no good choices, only bad choices and worse choices. And you've been making those choices for 20 years. "Yes, sir." Pierce looked at her for a long moment, then slowly came to attention and rendered a salute. "Staff Sergeant Rachel Thornton, on behalf of every Marine in this room, thank you." Thornton returned the salute, her hand trembling. Around her, one by one, the Marines who could stand did so. One by one, they saluted. Some of them were wounded. Some of them were crying. All of them were alive because of choices she had made, because of violence she had committed, because she had been willing to become the thing she had spent 20 years trying not to be. She held the salute until her arm ached, until tears she didn't know she was crying had run their course, until the weight of 20 years finally began to lift. Then she lowered her hand and went to help treat the wounded, because that was what Marines did. They took care of each other. They completed the mission. They survived together or not at all. The dust settled slowly in the motor pool, hanging in the air like ghosts of everything that had just happened. Thornton sat on an overturned equipment crate, her hands wrapped in field dressings where skin had split across her knuckles, her ribs taped where Volkov had cracked them, her face a road map of bruises that would take weeks to fade. Around her, medics moved through the aftermath with practiced efficiency of people who'd seen too many of these scenes, triaging wounds, stabilizing critical cases, separating the living from those who would never be anything else again. The body count was 12 contractors dead, 3 more who wouldn't make it to the field hospital, and 2 Marines who had been in the wrong place when the ceiling came down. 2 more names to add to the list that Thornton carried in her head. 2 more weights on a scale that would never balance no matter how many years she survived. Corporal Brennan was conscious again, his leg heavily bandaged, his face pale but determined. He had refused morphine until every other Marine had been treated. Good kid. He would make a fine Marine if the leg healed properly and if the nightmares that would come later didn't break him first. Thornton had seen it go both ways. Major Wolfe sat against a wall, holding an ice pack to her head, her eyes tracking Thornton with an intensity that suggested she was reassessing everything she thought she knew about staff sergeants who transferred from embassy duty. Colonel Pierce stood near the sealed entrance, coordinating with the QRF teams who were cutting through from the other side, his injured shoulder immobilized, but his command voice as steady as bedrock. And Viktor Volkov sat in the room's center, zip-tied and silent, his eyes never leaving Thornton, his face showing nothing but cold calculation. Even in defeat, he was already planning, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Men like him never stopped playing the game, not even when they had lost. Thornton found she didn't care. Let him plan. Let him calculate. The only future he had was a cell and a trial and justice that had been delayed by 20 years but was finally, inevitably coming. The sound of cutting torches working through debris filled the motor pool with harsh industrial noise. It would take hours to clear the entrance properly, but they had established communication with the outside, had confirmed that the rest of the base was secure, that Volkov's operation had been contained. The samples from Lab Section 7 were still there, still secured. The extraction helicopters had dispersed when it became clear their employer wasn't coming out. A few had been shot down by base defense systems. The rest had fled back across the border into Pakistan, where they would disappear into the machinery of plausible deniability that made modern warfare possible. Pierce approached Thornton, moving carefully, his body showing accumulated damage of a day that had started with a routine inspection and ended with him blowing up part of his own base. He sat down on the crate beside her with a grunt that was equal parts pain and exhaustion. "Medics say you should be evacuated," he said without preamble. "Possible concussion, cracked ribs, internal bruising, lacerations requiring sutures. You're a mess, Staff Sergeant." "I'll live. That seems to be your specialty." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the organized chaos of aftermath. Finally, Pierce spoke again, his voice lower, meant only for her. "I received a message from the Pentagon. Flash priority. They're sending a team, intelligence officers, JAG lawyers, people from agencies that officially don't exist. They want to debrief you about Volkov, about Task Force Sandstorm, about everything." "I know. They're also bringing your real service record, the classified one, the one that shows what actually happened in Desert Storm." Pierce paused. "They're declassifying it, all of it. The mission, the capture, the interrogation, the escape. Your team is getting recognition, finally." Thornton felt something twist in her chest. Recognition. After 20 years of silence. After 2 decades of being declared dead. After carrying the weight of 7 ghosts who died because someone gave the order and they followed it. Now the Pentagon wanted to give out medals and write official histories and turn her team into a footnote in a war that most people had already forgotten. "My team deserved recognition 20 years ago," she said quietly, "when it might have meant something to their families, when their parents were still alive to hear that their sons died as heroes instead of statistics. Now it's just politics and ass covering. Maybe, but it's also truth, and truth matters even when it's late. Does it? Does truth matter when it's convenient, when it serves someone's agenda?" She looked at him, her eyes hard. "You want to know what truth is, Colonel? Truth is that 7 men died following orders from people who sent them to die. Truth is that I survived because my captain ordered me to abandon my team, and I followed that order like a good Marine. Truth is that for 20 years I've been asking myself if I was brave or just a coward who was too afraid to die with them." Pierce didn't flinch from her anger. He had earned the right to hear it. "You followed your orders. You completed the mission. You brought back intelligence that saved lives. That's not cowardice. That's being a Marine." "Is it? Because some days I'm not sure there's a difference." Before Pierce could respond, one of the JAG officers who had been processing Volkov approached them. Young captain, fresh-faced, the kind of lawyer who had probably never been closer to combat than a courtroom. "Staff Sergeant Thornton, I need to inform you that Colonel Volkov is requesting to speak with you privately. He says he has information about Task Force Sandstorm that isn't in any official record." Thornton felt every muscle in her body tense. "Tell him to go to hell." "Ma'am, with respect, he's claiming he has information about the other members of your team, about what happened to them after you escaped. He says there are things you don't know, things you deserve to know." The words hit like a physical blow. Things she didn't know. She had spent 20 years assuming she knew everything, that she had seen everything, that the last images she had of her team were the final truth. But what if they weren't? What if there had been more? What if they had suffered longer than she knew? What if the questions that had no answers but demanded them anyway? "I'll talk to him," she said, "but not alone. Colonel Pierce comes with me." The JAG officer looked uncertain. "That's irregular. Everything about this situation is irregular, Captain. Colonel Pierce was present for the engagement. He's a material witness. He comes with me or Volkov can save his revelations for his tribunal." The captain looked at Pierce, who nodded once. "I'll accompany Staff Sergeant Thornton." "Consider it an order." They established an impromptu interrogation area in a corner of the motor pool, separated from the main space by portable barriers that gave the illusion of privacy without actually providing it. Volkov sat in a folding chair, his hands still secured behind his back, his face bruised but his eyes clear and calculating. 2 MPs stood behind him, weapons ready, because even zip-tied and defeated, men like Volkov were dangerous. Thornton sat across from him, her body language deliberately casual, her eyes never leaving his face. Pierce stood behind her, a silent presence that made it clear this conversation had witnesses. "You wanted to talk," Thornton said. "Talk." Volkov smiled, and it was the smile of someone who still thought he held cards. 20 years is a long time to carry questions, long time to wonder what happened in those hours after you ran away. I didn't run, I followed orders. Semantics. You left them, you were not there for what came after. What came after was you murdering them. I know that part. I saw you kill Calloway. I saw Riley die. Cross bought me time with his life. The others were already dead. There's nothing you can tell me that changes those facts. But there are details that matter, details that might make you understand why they died the way they did. Thornton's hands clenched on her knees. Enlighten me. Volkov leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. Your Captain Calloway, strong man, principled man, he lasted longest under interrogation, not because he was toughest, but because he was most skilled at resistance. He knew all the techniques, all the ways to protect information while appearing to cooperate. Very impressive, very professional. Get to the point. The point is that in his final hour before I executed him, he spoke to me. Volkov paused. He told me things, not classified information. He was too disciplined for that. But personal things, things about his team, things about you. Thornton's heart was hammering against her cracked ribs, but her face showed nothing. What things? He told me that you were youngest member of Task Force Sandstorm, that you were only 18 years old, that you had lied about your age to get into the program, that you had been so determined to serve that you forged documents to make yourself old enough to qualify. He was very proud of that. Even dying, he was proud of your determination. The words hit harder than any physical blow Volkov had landed during their fight. She had never known Calloway had discovered her secret, had never known he had been proud instead of angry, had carried guilt for 20 years about deceiving her commanding officer. And now she learned he had known all along. He also told me, Volkov continued, his voice dropping to something that might have been respect or might have been mockery, that if anyone on the team would survive, it would be you. Not because you were strongest or fastest or best trained, but because you were most motivated. He said you had something to prove, to yourself, to the Marine Corps, to everyone who had ever doubted you. He said that kind of motivation was worth more than any training. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand something. I want you to know that when I killed your captain, when I shot him in the head, his last words were about you. Volkov's eyes bored into hers. He looked at me and he said, "She's going to kill you someday, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday that girl is going to hunt you down and make you pay for all of this." And then he smiled, and then I shot him. Volkov paused. He died believing you would avenge him, and today you did. So I am telling you these things because I want you to know that I always knew you were coming. For 20 years I have prepared for this. For 20 years I have planned and trained and positioned myself. And still you won, still you proved him right. Thornton sat very still, her mind trying to process information that recontextualized everything she had believed about that day. Calloway had known, had believed in her, had died with confidence that she would survive and make things right. The weight she had been carrying, the guilt of abandoning her team, shifted somehow. Didn't disappear, would never disappear, but shifted into something she might eventually learn to carry differently. "Riley and Cross," she said, her voice rough. "Tell me about them." Riley was tech specialist, very intelligent, very scared. He cried when we interrogated him, but he never broke, never gave us access codes or radio frequencies or any of the information we needed. He died quickly. I made it quick because he had earned that mercy by staying silent. That's not mercy, that's just murder with better timing. Perhaps, but in war small mercies are all that exist. Volkov shifted in his chair. Cross was different. Demolitions expert, crazy man. He laughed during interrogation, actually laughed. When I applied pain, he would laugh and tell jokes, very disturbing, very effective at maintaining morale of other prisoners. I hated him more than the others because he would not show fear. He wasn't fearless, Thornton said quietly. He was just better at hiding it than the rest of us. Perhaps, when you escaped through ventilation shaft, Cross knew we would come for him. He knew he would die. But he decided to die on his terms. He attacked 3 guards, unarmed, injured, exhausted. He killed 2 of them before I shot him. 7 times I shot him before he stopped moving. 7 times. Volkov's voice carried something that might have been genuine emotion. That is not a man, that is a force of nature. Thornton felt tears on her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. He taught me how to make IEDs, how to think tactically, how to turn everyday objects into weapons. Everything I used to escape, I learned from him. Then his death was not wasted. He bought you time, he bought you life, he bought you revenge. Volkov's smile was gone now, replaced by something that might have been genuine emotion. I have killed many people in my career, soldiers, civilians, people who deserved it and people who did not. But those 3 men in that bunker, they were warriors, real warriors. The kind that make you grateful you were not facing them when they were at full strength. They were Marines, Thornton said simply. That's what Marines do. We fight, we endure, we complete the mission even when the mission is just buying time for someone else to complete it. Yes, and that is why I knew I had to find you, had to finish this. Because leaving you alive meant leaving their legacy alive, meant their sacrifice had meaning. I could not allow that. I had to prove that their faith in you was misplaced. Volkov paused. How'd that work out for you? For the first time, Volkov's mask cracked. Just for a moment, just long enough to show something underneath that might have been regret, or might have been respect, or might have been the recognition that he had spent 20 years preparing for a fight he was always going to lose. It worked out exactly as your captain predicted, he said quietly. You won, I lost, they are avenged, and I am here to face consequences of my actions. Perhaps that is justice. Perhaps that is just the universe balancing itself. Justice would have been you dying in that bunker instead of them. Yes, but we do not always get justice. Sometimes we only get aftermath. The MPs took Volkov away after that, leading him toward the area where prisoners were being processed and prepared for transport. Thornton watched him go, this man who had haunted her nightmares for 20 years and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no closure. Just the hollow understanding that revenge, when it finally arrived, was never quite what you imagined it would be. Pierce placed a hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, not killing him, letting him face trial. That took more strength than pulling the trigger would have. Did it, because right now I'm not sure what strength looks like anymore. It looks like you, Staff Sergeant. It looks like surviving impossible odds. It looks like saving your Marines. It looks like carrying your dead team for 20 years and never letting their memory die. He paused. There's something else, something you should see. Pierce led her through the motor pool to a quiet corner where Major Wolf was sitting with a laptop, reviewing footage from base security cameras. When she saw Thornton approaching, she stood and saluted. Staff Sergeant. Ma'am, I've been reviewing the attack footage, all of it, from the moment they breached the perimeter to the moment we secured the motor pool. She turned the laptop so they could see the screen. I wanted you to see this. The footage showed Thornton fighting through the motor pool, showed her moving with impossible speed and precision, showed her making decisions in fractions of seconds that should have required minutes, showed her doing things that shouldn't have been possible for someone her size, her age, her official background. But it also showed something else. In the moments between the violence and the split seconds when she thought no one was watching, the footage showed her checking on Marines, showed her redirecting her fire to protect the wounded, showed her taking risks to save people even when the tactically smart decision would have been to let them die, showed her being, despite everything, still a Marine who cared about her team. I wanted you to see this, Wolf said quietly, because I wanted you to understand something. Yes, you're a legend. Yes, you're the Reaper of Baghdad. Yes, you did things today that will be talked about for decades, but you're also just a Marine doing what Marines do, taking care of your people, completing the mission, bringing everyone home who can be brought home. Thornton stared at the screen, watching herself move through violence with the ease of long practice, and tried to reconcile the person she saw with the person she felt like inside. They didn't match. They had never matched. The ghost and the Marine. The legend and the woman. The Reaper and Rachel Thornton, all of them existing in the same body, all of them fighting for control, all of them exhausted. "I'm tired," she said. "I've been tired for 20 years. I don't want to be the Reaper anymore. I don't want to be the legend. I just want to be a Marine." "Then be a Marine," Pierce said. "The Pentagon is declassifying your record. Your team is getting recognition. You're getting recognition, and then you're getting transferred." "Transferred where?" "Quantico. Scout Sniper School. They want you as chief instructor. They want you to train the next generation. They want you to make sure that what you know, what your team knew, doesn't die with you." Thornton felt something crack inside her chest, not break, crack like ice on a lake in early spring, like the first sign that winter might eventually end. "Teaching," she said slowly, "passing it on, making sure they don't die for nothing." "Exactly. Mission first, Staff Sergeant, always mission first. And your mission now is to make sure their legacy lives on through every Marine you train." The cutting torches finally broke through the debris blocking the motor pool entrance. Light from the outside world flooded in, harsh and bright and real. Helicopters waited beyond to evacuate the wounded. Command teams waited to debrief everyone. JAG officers waited to begin the endless process of turning combat into paperwork. But before any of that, there was a formation. Pierce called everyone who could stand to attention. Every Marine in the motor pool, wounded or whole, exhausted or alert, came together in ranks that were ragged but determined. Pierce stood in front of them, his injured shoulder held stiffly, his uniform torn and blood-stained, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years in uniform. "Marines," he said, "what we experienced today was combat at its most brutal. We lost good people. We shed blood. We faced an enemy who had every advantage. And we beat them anyway. We beat them because of training, because of courage, because the Marine next to you refused to quit." He paused. "And we beat them because of one Marine in particular." He turned to face Thornton. "Staff Sergeant Rachel Thornton, front and center." Thornton's legs felt like they were made of lead, but she walked forward anyway. Stood at attention in front of her commanding officer, wondered what was coming next. 20 years ago, Pierce continued, Task Force Sandstorm went into Iraq on a mission that everyone knew was a one-way trip. 8 Marines, 8 warriors, they completed their mission. They located enemy targets, they called in strikes that saved coalition lives, and they paid the ultimate price. He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. 7 of them came home in flag-draped coffins, honored in secret ceremonies that their families couldn't attend because the mission was classified. He pulled a small case from his pocket. But one came home on foot. One came home after 6 days of evasion, after killing 7 enemy soldiers who were hunting her, after walking 80 miles through hostile territory with nothing but determination and her team's memory driving her forward. One came home and then disappeared into the machinery of military bureaucracy because that was what her country asked of her. To be dead, to be forgotten, to be a ghost. Pierce opened the case. Inside was a medal, Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor. By order of the Secretary of the Navy for extraordinary heroism in combat against Soviet-Iraqi forces during Operation Desert Storm, and for further extraordinary heroism in defense of forward operating base Wolverine, I am authorized to present Staff Sergeant Rachel Thornton with the Navy Cross, effective immediately. He pinned the medal to her torn, blood-stained uniform. The medal felt heavy. Felt like responsibility. Felt like 7 ghosts watching and judging and finally approving. And furthermore, Pierce said, By order of the Commandant of the Marine Corps, effective immediately, Staff Sergeant Rachel Thornton is promoted to the rank of Gunnery Sergeant and assigned as Chief Instructor, Scout Sniper School, Marine Corps Base, Quantico, Virginia. The Marines erupted in applause. Not polite applause. Not ceremonial applause. The kind of applause that comes from people who have seen something they didn't believe was possible and are expressing their gratitude for having witnessed it. Thornton stood at attention, tears streaming down her face, her cracked ribs screaming, her hands throbbing, her body demanding rest that she wouldn't get for hours yet. But for the first time in 20 years, she felt something other than guilt, not happiness, not peace. But something, a possibility, a glimpse of what life might look like if she could learn to carry her ghosts differently. Pierce came to attention and rendered a salute. Not the casual salute of daily military life, the slow, deliberate salute of warrior to warrior, of respect earned in blood and proven in fire. On behalf of every Marine, Gunnery Sergeant Thornton, thank you. Semper Fi. Semper Fidelis, Thornton replied, returning the salute. Always faithful. The formation broke after that, dissolving into organized chaos of evacuation and aftermath. But before Thornton could disappear into the crowd, a young Marine approached her. It was Brennan, limping heavily on his bandaged leg, his face pale but determined. "Gunny," he said, "I wanted to thank you for saving my life, for shooting me instead of letting me die. You don't thank someone for shooting you, Corporal." "I do when it saved my life." He hesitated. "I also wanted to ask you something. When I heal up, when I'm back on duty, I'm putting in for Scout Sniper School. Think I'll make it?" Thornton looked at him, really looked at him. Saw past the youth and the fear and the trauma of his first real combat. Saw the determination underneath. Saw someone who had been tested and hadn't broken. Saw someone who might, with the right training and the right guidance, become the kind of Marine that Calloway and Riley and Cross would have been proud of. "Maybe," she said, "if you work hard, if you learn from your mistakes, if you remember that being a sniper isn't about killing from a distance, it's about patience and discipline and understanding that every shot you don't take is as important as every shot you do take. I'll work hard, I'll learn, I promise. Then I'll see you at Quantico, Corporal Brennan. Don't make me regret accepting you." "Yes, Gunny, thank you, Gunny." He limped away and Thornton watched him go, feeling responsibility's weight settle onto her shoulders. Teaching, passing on knowledge, making sure the next generation survived longer and fought better and came home more often than her generation had. It was a mission. Maybe not the mission she had imagined for herself when she joined the Marines at 17 with forged documents and too much determination, but it was a mission that mattered. Mission first. Always mission first. The helicopter ride to the field hospital was a blur of morphine and exhaustion, and the kind of sleep that comes from a body deciding it has done enough and shutting down whether the mind agrees or not. When Thornton awoke, it was in a clean bed in a military hospital, her ribs properly treated, her hands professionally bandaged, her body finally getting the rest it had been demanding for 3 days. Pierce was sitting in a chair beside her bed, reading a file that had more classification markings than actual text. "How long was I out?" Thornton asked, her voice rough. 36 hours. Doctors wanted to keep you under longer, but you're stubborn even when unconscious." He closed the file. "This is your real service record, declassified, all of it. Task Force Sandstorm, Operation Desert Storm, everything." He paused. "And it's being released to the families of your team. Calloway's widow gets to know what really happened to her husband. Riley's daughter gets to know her father died a hero. Cross's brother gets closure after 20 years of questions." Thornton felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Will they hate me for surviving when their loved ones didn't?" I spoke with Calloway's widow on the phone, 80 years old now, still sharp as a tack. "You want to know what she said when I told her you survived?" Pierce smiled. "She said, good. Wade always said that girl would do great things. I'm glad he was right. The tears came then, and Thornton let them because sometimes crying was the only language strong enough to express things that words couldn't reach. "She wants to meet you," Pierce continued. "When you get to Quantico, she has something for you, something Wade wanted you to have if you survived." "What is it?" "She wouldn't tell me, said it was between you and him." 2 months later, Thornton stood on the rifle range at Quantico, watching 16 potential scout snipers work through their preliminary qualifications. The Virginia morning was cool, the sky clear, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt like she might be exactly where she was supposed to be. Pierce had retired from active duty but visited often, drawn by the same need to stay connected to Marines that kept most retired officers circling military bases like moths around lights. He stood beside her now, watching the students work. "You're good at this," he said, "teaching. I'm learning there's a difference. Not as much as you think." He checked his watch. "You have a visitor coming, should be here any minute." Before Thornton could ask who, a car pulled up to the range. An elderly woman stepped out, moving carefully but with dignity, Mrs. Calloway. She looked exactly like the photograph Wade had carried in his wallet, older now, decades older, but with the same clear eyes and determined expression. Thornton walked to meet her, suddenly nervous in a way that combat had never made her nervous. "Mrs. Calloway, it's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine, dear. Wade wrote about you in his letters, called you Reaper, said you were the toughest Marine he ever trained." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small case. "He gave me this before his last deployment, told me if anything happened to him and if by some miracle you survived, I should give it to you." She opened the case. Inside were Wade Calloway's dog tags, and underneath them a letter. Thornton's hands shook as she took the letter, opened it, read words written by a man who had been dead for 20 years. "Reaper, mission first. Live for us. Make it mean something. Train them better than I trained you. Bring them home. That's an order." WC, she stood there in the Virginia morning, holding orders from a ghost, and felt something finally settle into place. Not closure, not healing, but purpose, mission, direction. "He was proud of you," Mrs. Calloway said, squeezing her hand. "From the day you joined the team until the day he died, he believed in you." Her voice was gentle. "We all believe in you. I'll do my best, ma'am. I'll make sure they learn. I'll make sure they survive. I'll make sure his legacy lives on." "That's all anyone can ask." The elderly woman squeezed her hand. "Welcome home, Reaper, welcome home." After she left, Thornton returned to the range. The students were finishing their qualifications, most passing, some struggling but showing potential. One of them she noticed was Brennan. His leg had healed well. He was keeping up with the others. He had promise. "All right," she called out. "Cease fire, weapons safe, gather around." The 16 students assembled in front of her, young faces, full of determination and fear and the kind of optimism that only comes from not yet having been tested by real combat. "You're here because you think you want to be scout snipers," Thornton said. "You think you want to be the ones who go forward, who operate alone, who take the shots that no one else can take. Some of you will make it through this school. Some of you won't. That's not a judgment. That's just reality. Not everyone is built for this." She paused, looking at each of them in turn. "But if you do make it through, if you earn the title, I want you to understand something. Being a sniper isn't about killing from a distance. It's about patience. It's about discipline. It's about making decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life and making them anyway because that's what Marines do. We make hard choices. We carry heavy weights. We complete the mission even when the mission costs us everything." She could see them processing her words, trying to understand what she was really saying. "I had a team once," she continued. 20 years ago, 8 of us. We went on a mission that everyone knew was suicide. We completed that mission. 7 of them died doing it. I survived because my captain ordered me to survive, ordered me to carry on the mission, ordered me to make sure their sacrifice meant something." She touched the dog tags hanging around her neck. Calloway's tags that she had worn every day since Mrs. Calloway had given them to her. "So that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to make sure you survive. I'm here to make sure you're so well trained, so well prepared, so utterly competent that when you face the impossible, you do what Marines have always done. You find a way, you adapt, you overcome, you complete the mission, and you bring your brothers and sisters home." She let that sink in. This school is going to push you to your absolute limit. It's going to make you question everything about yourself. It's going to hurt, and it's going to be unfair. And there will be days when you want to quit. Don't quit. Push through. Because somewhere out there, someday, there is going to be a Marine whose life depends on whether you learned these lessons well enough, whether you were tough enough, whether you were Marine enough. She stepped back. "Questions?" Brennan raised his hand. "Gunny, is it true what they say?" "That you're the Reaper of Baghdad?" Thornton looked at him, at all of them, and made a decision. "Yes, it's true. I was the Reaper. I survived things that should have killed me. I did things that I'm not proud of. I carry ghosts that will never leave me, but I'm still here, still standing, still teaching, still making sure that their deaths meant something." She took a breath. "So yes, I'm the Reaper. But more importantly, I'm a Marine, just like you, just like every person who ever wore this uniform and decided that something was more important than their own life. And that's what I'm going to teach you to be. Not killers, not legends, just Marines, the kind of Marines who bring each other home." The student stood a little straighter, nodded, understood, or at least thought they understood, which was enough for now. Understanding would come later, bought with sweat and pain and the slow realization that everything she was teaching them might someday be the only thing standing between them and death. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow, 500, we start live fire exercises. Bring your game faces. Dismissed." They dispersed, talking among themselves, their voices carrying excitement and nervousness in equal measure. Pierce approached as the last of them left. "That was a good speech." It was the truth. "That's all I have left to give them. Truth is enough. Truth and skill and the knowledge that someone who survived the impossible is going to make damn sure they're prepared for anything." They stood together, watching the sun climb higher in the Virginia sky, two warriors who had found their way to the same place through very different paths. "You ever regret it?" Thornton asked. "All the years, all the deployments, all the things you had to do?" "Every day," Pierce said honestly. "But I also don't regret it, if that makes sense. We did what we had to do. We made the choices that needed making. And now we make sure the next generation is ready to make their own choices. Mission first. Always mission first." Thornton looked out across the range, imagining all the Marines who would train here, who would learn from her, who would carry forward the lessons that Wade Calloway and James Riley and Daniel Cross had died to teach her. It was a heavy responsibility, but it was also an honor, a purpose. A way to make 20 years of survival mean something more than just not dying. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of gunpowder and possibility. And Thornton smiled, not a big smile, not the smile of someone who had found peace, but the smile of someone who had found purpose, which was better than peace anyway. She was the Reaper of Baghdad. She was Gunnery Sergeant Rachel Thornton. She was a Marine. And her mission was just beginning. Somewhere she hoped Wade Calloway was watching. Somewhere she hoped her team knew that she had kept her promise, that she had made it mean something, that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The watch continued. It always would. And Thornton would stand it for as long as her body held together and her mind stayed sharp, and Marines needed someone to teach them how to survive the impossible. Mission first. Always mission first. Forever faithful. Up next, you've got two more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.